This time on Her Service. This episode of Her Service dives into the lives of two extraordinary women who defied expectations and changed history.
And I think that women in this period really took advantage of that public perception of what women should be and then made the reality their own.
Meet Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, the U.S. Army's first female surgeon, a trailblazer who shattered barriers.
She was pretty regularly ostracized for the fact that she often wore pants under her shortened skirts.
Then discover the daring Sarah Emma Edmonds, who cross-dressed to serve as a soldier, spy, and nurse.
In 1857, she escaped her family at the age of 16.
Their stories of courage and resilience await. All that and more, just ahead on Her Service, the Civil War.
Across nearly 250 years of American history,
roughly 3 million women have answered the call to serve.
That's 3 million stories.
3 million acts of courage.
And 3 million lives that have shaped the fabric of our nation.
Yet, so often, their contributions remain whispers in the grand narrative of American military history.
From disguised soldiers fighting for independence in the Revolution,
to the daring pilots who soared through the skies in World War II,
and to the women standing on the front lines today.
Their presence has been essential.
Their impact undeniable.
This is not just a history lesson. This is a reclamation.
This is
Her Service.
We are here to amplify the voices that have been too long silenced.
To honor the resilience that has been too often overlooked.
and to acknowledge the sacrifices that have been too rarely recognized.
This podcast is dedicated to the women veterans, past, present, and future.
We're here to ensure their stories are never forgotten.
Join us as we delve into the extraordinary lives of these American heroes and discover the true, complete story of those who bravely served.
This is
Her Service.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Kopanger, and welcome to the DAV podcast, Her Service. Today, we head back to the Civil War and discover some amazing American women who fought for their country, or, well, I guess technically countries, plural. Anyway, and I got to say this up front, my mom's family comes from the South. She was a Pentecostal preacher, and she worked hard to remove all traces of a Southern accent. But you put her and my grandma in the same room together, and suddenly it was like the air thickened with humidity, and they're knee-deep in conversations about mint juleps and the ever-fluctuating price of pecans. It was like a full-on Southern revival. Now, and this is where things get a little weird. I'm from California, but oddly, when I talk about the South, an accent I never had sometimes pops up like a rogue magnolia blossom. So if a y'all or a fixin' to happens to tumble out of my Yankee mouth today, don't y'all fret. It ain't my fault. It's just that somewhere deep down in my DNA, there's a secret stash of sweet tea, a comfy porch swing, and apparently a little bit of Southern charm just waiting for its moment to shine. And speaking of charm, we have two absolutely charming women joining us today. Straight from the treasure trove of history at the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, please give a warm welcome to the wonderful Mary Beth Kirkus and the delightful Katie Dick. Mary Beth and Katie, thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having us, Jonathan. We're excited to be here. Yes, we are.
Mary Beth, your family, military family that is, aren't you?
Yes, actually I am. My father was an infantry captain during Vietnam. Sadly, we lost him early in the war in 1967. And he worked primarily with refugees in Vietnam before the big fighting started.
Yeah.
And then I married into the military. My husband was an Army armor. He was actually spent his entire enlistment at Fort Knox in Kentucky. He did his basic there. He drove tanks there and went to armor school there, the whole 9 yards. And then he left the Army and joined the Coast Guard. And he was active duty Coast Guard yeoman for 27 years and retired as a chief warrant officer in 2017.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. Since you were married into the military, you had to do a lot of service yourself too. So thank you for that part of your service.
Well, I was told when he made chief that I would always outrank him. So
Absolutely. Now, before we get into our featured women today, you have some really interesting things there at the National Civil War Museum. You have some artifacts. You got things like Robert E. Lee's Bible, Abraham Lincoln's hat box, and even George Pickett's sleeve that still has traces of his blood on it from the Battle of Gaines' Mill. What else can you tell us about the National Civil War Museum?
Well, the National Civil War Museum was, we opened our doors in 2001, and we were actually the brainchild of then Mayor Steve Reed. And we're located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the highest point of the city, in Reservoir Park. When you drive into or near Harrisburg, you'll see our flag flying above the city because we are at that highest point. But the mayor thought that because we were a capital city, that, with most capital cities, the sidewalks roll out when the legislature isn't in session. And so he felt that economic driver, like a world-class museum, would help drive the economy here. And I say this because I'm speaking, Katie is actually a Harrisburg native, and I am not. As I said, I came here in 2017. And but they designed the museum to be sort of a Civil War 101. So it starts with the causes of the wars. We talk about the Kansas Wars, Bloody Kansas and John Brown and the slave markets, and we go into Fort Sumter. We talk about individuals. We talk about battles. We cover uniforms and armaments. And we also cover a little bit of the local history of Harrisburg in the Civil War. It was the home of Camp Curtin, which was the largest deployment camp for the Union Army before the Civil War. There were troops were training here. It was, and many believe that it was a target of Robert E. Lee's incursion into the North. Harrisburg was one of the many targets. So we talk a little bit about that. The building itself is over 3,000 square feet. We have 25,000 square feet of exhibit space and about 1,000 plus artifacts on display, with about another 37,000 artifacts in the collection total. And these cover everything from tools to women's clothing to uniforms, artillery pieces and jewelry, slave artifacts. I mean, it really is a fabulous, fabulous collection. We are a Blue Star Museum for all the folks who are military families and traveling over the summer. And we'll also be celebrating our 25th anniversary in 2026. We are always thinking about how to better tell the story of the American Civil War. And one of the criticisms we've received over the years was that our exhibits lacked any real history about women. We generally receive 4.5 to 5-star ratings on Yelp and Google reviews, and but the one running comment was, "Where are the women?" We knew we were failing women in the Civil War. So about 18 months ago, the staff decided as a team that we were going to correct that. The hardest part was trying to figure out what was going to go up on the walls. What we couldn't fit up on the walls, we put into an online exhibit that people can access through our website, www.nationalcivilwarmuseum.org. Just go to the events and exhibits tab and you can see what we have there. But we also have quite a few videos on our YouTube channel that focus on women. Some are short little 5-minute videos and some are longer. But we really want to be able to make sure that women's voices are heard in the history of the telling of the Civil War, since they made such a huge impact. So we focused on the women who kept down, held the fort, ran the farms, worked in the factories and the arsenals. And we covered a lot of ground in a small space and provide the folks who are interested with a whole lot more information than they probably thought was available.
Well, okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. 1861 is the year that the Civil War exploded. So if you could set the scene for us, what was the daily life generally like for women in America during that time? What were kind of the expectations that people put on women at the time?
Well, things have certainly changed in the last 160 years or so. Women in the Victorian era were, really largely limited to the home. Society had kind of asserted that these women, they belong in the home, raising children, teaching them, preparing meals, mending clothes, and not much else. Very traditional time period. Women were supposed to manage the household affairs. Their primary roles during this time were being wives and mothers. They were very much tied down to that, and they didn't have a lot of access to education. They didn't have a lot of their own agency or their own rights. Like they were seen as belonging to the men in their lives, their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, what have you. And they were expected to act a certain way too with that. They were supposed to be submissive, nurturing, domestic, serving those around them, being very docile, and all of these very, reductive, simplistic characteristics.
So given the expectations of women at the time, you have the emphasis on modesty, piety, domesticity, and that, this is my favorite, delicate indoor appearance. What would compel a woman to go out and fight?
Well, I think that women in this period, women who were, we've shown through the years that women we don't have different needs or expectations from men. We want adventure. We want to be challenged. We want education. We want an opportunity to be who we are. And I think that women in this period really took advantage of that public perception of what women should be, and then made the reality their own. So these women took that novel idea of women are supposed to not really know what's going on around them in politics. They're not really supposed to be, smart by any means. They're not supposed to be smart. And I use air quotes around that. But what they did then was took that public perception and made it their own reality. So women like smugglers, Confederate women, were very astute at smuggling. And they took advantage of the fact that men did not touch women. They would never ask a woman to raise her skirts. They would never ask to see what was inside her cloak. That was completely unheard of. So we have stories here of women who smuggled gold and US dollars inside their corsets. They hung shoes and weapons and medicine from the hoops under their skirts just to get through enemy lines without, anyone suspecting what they were doing. Women like Elizabeth Van Lew and Rose Greenough sat in the midst of generals and listened to battle plans and then sent those out to their spy rings so that they could be sent back to the men in charge of the army that they were working for. So what we discovered was there were so many options of women and examples of women serving in formally masculine roles, but they were changing how they did that. And in order to do that, they changed how they were perceived. So for many, many people, it was easy to change who you were in the 19th century. Let's say you got in trouble with the law in one city. So you just go somewhere else and you would become someone else. There were no passports or identification cards or social media footprints, birth certificates. These were not things that you had to, driver's licenses. You didn't need those things. And you certainly didn't need them to prove who you were. Show up in a town, be this person, say you are this person and be this person, and you are forever this person. And because sexuality people weren't traipsing around showing off body parts. They were literally showing very little skin for the most part. So nobody questioned. If you dressed like a woman, you were a woman. You were perceived as a woman, you were a woman. If you dressed like a man and you looked like a man, you were perceived as a man, you were a man. Nobody was going to ask you to prove it. You had folks like Frances Clayton, who joined the Federal Army as an infantryman alongside her husband. So she learned to walk like a man, swear like a man, gamble, smoke. She cut her hair. And if you see pictures of her, really honestly, when she's in uniform, I wouldn't guess that she was a woman. But then you have other folks like Albert Cashier and Sarah Emma Edmonds, who are sort of, they were living as men before the war broke out. Albert Cashier, his uncle realized that when he was the age of 13, that a 13-year-old boy could make more money working in a factory than a 13-year-old girl could as a domestic. So Albert Cashier was born at the age of 13. Sarah Emma Edmonds was actually running away from an abusive father and realized that if she went from Canada to America and went from being a woman to a man, it would be harder for her father to find her. So when war broke out, they really had no other option living as men but to enlist, because that's what men did. You really, these women wanted to see the elephant. They wanted to have adventures. They wanted to do the things that they wanted to do. And the easiest way to do that is to do it as men.
I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder how much ammunition you could hide in a hoop skirt. You could probably get a good amount in a decent hoop skirt.
Well, one of the things that we included in the women's exhibit is actually we had a reproduction day dress on exhibit in our education gallery. And the curator and myself went through a diary entry and we hung items from the hoops of the hoop skirt. So a couple yards of wool fabric, we hung shoes, hats, all kinds of things just from the hoops. Now, I can't imagine how heavy it was.
Yeah.
But I mean, these women would take bolts of fabric and make skirts that they would then wear under their skirts so that they could smuggle the fabric through enemy lines.
Yeah.
So the weight of what they were carrying on their person in order to get across and get through checkpoints, phenomenal. And if they were walking, it was even more stunning.
And in a corset, too.
But there were things hidden inside the corset as well.
Yeah.
So they were hiding gold and currency inside their corsets as well.
It's kind of amazing.
They had their money tucked right in.
We have two remarkable women that we're going to really kind of discuss today. You mentioned one already, Sarah Emma Edmonds. I have a hard time saying her name for some reason. And the other is Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. So Dr. Walker holds a unique distinction as the only U.S. woman to ever receive something very special. But we're not going to talk about this yet. We're going to wait just for a second to kind of build a little bit of drama on that one. But let's learn about her background first. What was Dr. Walker's life like before the Civil War began? And what was her path to becoming the first female surgeon employed by the U.S. Army?
Well, Dr. Mary E. Walker is such a hugely important icon for women, and her story is so inspiring and really interesting. So her early life really set the stage for who she was going to become as an adult. She was born in 1832 in Oswego, New York, and her parents were very progressive. They were abolitionists, and they supported education and free thinking for women. They even founded the first free school in town just so their daughters could also attend and get an education. So education, super important to them. And then even in their household, clothing was another point of freedom for the children. Mary, she was allowed to wear bloomer pants instead of, the skirts and corsets that all the other women were wearing. And this is something that would really be a recurring practice in her life. She was pretty regularly ostracized for the fact that she often wore pants under her shortened skirts. And it was very practical for her because, she was working alongside all of her siblings on the family farm, doing all of manual labor. So she knew it was practical even then to be wearing bloomers. It's pretty suffice to say that Mary was well-rounded in all types of education and experience, even from a young age. She became a teacher after finishing school, where she worked to pay for medical school, which is something she always knew she wanted to do. She earned her medical degree in 1855 from Syracuse Medical College, and she was the second woman to do so after Elizabeth Blackwell. The onset of the war is where things really got put into motion, so we'll stop here for now.
All right. So now we're going to jump over to Sarah Edmonds. Now, you did kind of give us a little bit of an introduction to her of why she adopted a male identity, but can you tell us a little bit more about what makes her significant in the context of the Civil War?
Sure. What we know about Sarah Emma Edmonds really comes from her own biography. We know she was born in New Brunswick, Canada in 1841. To a father who wanted a son, not a daughter. And so poor Sarah had to pay the price for that. He was very abusive. He arranged for her to go into a marriage that she did not want to be in. So in 1857, she escaped her family at the age of 16. She went over to the next town is what she did. And she changed her name from Sarah Emma Edmondson to Sarah Emma Edmonds. And then it didn't take her long to realize that that really wasn't much of a disguise.
Yeah.
She figured she would be safer if she traveled to America, and she would be safer traveling if she traveled as a man. So Franklin Thompson was born. Franklin settled in Hartford, Connecticut. He became a Bible salesman. He eventually made his way west as a bookseller and settled in Flint, Michigan. In May of 1861, Franklin enlisted in the 2nd Michigan Infantry. Franklin did what every young man was doing at the time and enlisted in the military.
All right, let's turn back to Dr. Walker for a second. So a woman physician in a war setting, she has battlefield trauma that she's dealing with, rudimentary medical practices, limited resources. So besides that, what were some of the professional and personal challenges she would have faced?
Well, for starters, she was a woman in a field literally historically forever dominated by men. So that was a pretty big challenge for her. When the war broke out, Walker wanted to offer her medical expertise, since she'd been running her own private practice for years, so she's well equipped, and she had all the knowledge and the education. She went to Washington and was denied because she was a woman. So instead, she served as an unpaid volunteer surgeon at the U.S. Patent Office. And even then, she was only allowed to practice as a nurse in temporary hospitals since the Army had no female surgeons yet. So that was certainly tough for her. In 1862, she moved to Virginia and she treated wounded soldiers there near the front lines. A year later, in 1863, she was finally allowed to practice as a surgeon. So after halfway into the war, was she finally able to start practicing. Her titles included the contract acting assistant surgeon, civilian, within the Army of the Cumberland, and she was an assistant surgeon within the 52nd Ohio Infantry, and quite significant, the first female surgeon in U.S. military history. Yeah. Within those roles, Walker, she continued wearing her masculine clothing as she worked because they allowed her to do her job better, and that's something she was very vocal about. She could get around better if she wasn't wearing a big dress. It was a lot more sanitary for her legs to be covered and to have her full, mobility. And even in her own words, she said, "I don't wear men's clothes. I wear my own clothes." Because to her, they were not masculine. They were simply her own clothes, because why shouldn't they be?
Yeah. She owned them. They were her clothes.
Exactly. What she wore.
And it's funny that even, fast forward to the Vietnam War and women were still having to deal with wearing men's clothes because they were supposed to wear skirts and things like that. But that's a whole other story. Now, Private Frank Thompson, who is actually Sarah Edmonds, had a great disguise. Do we have any contemporary accounts from her fellow soldiers or commanders that suggest that anybody was suspicious? Or was she able to keep her true identity a complete secret?
We don't really have contemporary sources for her. Them telling stories of her. She wrote her own memoir, as I mentioned earlier, called Nurse and Spy in the Union Army, comprising the adventures and experiences of a woman in the hospitals, camps, and battlefields. We know that she served in the 2nd Michigan Infantry and covered the retreated 1st Manassas. And this is where Sarah/Frank go to work as a nurse. So still serving as Franklin, she is serving as a nurse and as a battlefield aide, a corpsman, let's say. Franklin was made the postmaster for the regiment and was riding sometimes 40 miles a day to deliver and retrieve mail bags. Then the 2nd Michigan fights at 2nd Manassas. They fight at Fredericksburg and Antietam, and at each battlefield, Franklin is caring for the wounded and it's still acting as a nurse. At Antietam, Sarah writes that she was recruited as a spy. Now, according to her memoir, Franklin is disguised as an Irish peddler and an emancipated slave, known as a contraband. And for this, she would paint her skin with silver nitrate, according to her. Now, there are some sources that say that didn't happen, but Sarah stands by the fact that she did do all of these things. She writes this memoir that talks about narrow escapes and all of these thrilling, avoiding being captured. And it's a real tale of daring do. But it should be noted that, when Sarah finally goes back to claim a pension, it is her fellow soldiers that stand by her and say, yes, Franklin Thompson served with us, served with honor. Franklin performed his duty as any other soldier would have. So that we do know, but there's not a whole lot of, well, I served with Franklin Thompson and this is what we know. That doesn't come until way after the war.
Okay. Was she successful in keeping her disguise though? Did people know it was a woman, or did they think that Franklin was just Franklin?
They thought Franklin was Franklin.
That's awesome.
Yes, and it's actually not until 1863 when Sarah's in Kentucky, she contracts malaria. And what happens is Franklin disappears. Franklin Thompson just disappears. And then Sarah Emma Edmonds comes back to serve as a nurse.
That malaria will change things for you left and right. You never know. You got to be careful. All right, let's go to April 10th, 1864. That's the day that Dr. Walker was arrested and sent to Richmond, Virginia, to prison at Castle Thunder. What can you tell us about that? How did she get captured, and how did she get out of the prison?
Well, Dr. Walker was captured and sent to Castle Thunder for the very high crime, helping everybody. During her time with the 52nd Ohio Infantry, Walker was regularly crossing battle lines to treat and operate on soldiers and civilians. So this is what really got her in trouble for, performing as a doctor and helping all of those that she's able. She was caught by Confederate troops after assisting on an amputation, and they were like, you're a spy. So she was branded a spy, and her time at Castle Thunder was yet again marked by her insistence on wearing clothes that were considered fit for her, she considered fit for her profession. And she even refused the provided clothes from the prison, which they said were, quote, more becoming of her sex. So she was steadfast in that. She denied them. No, I want to wear my own clothes. Can I interrupt?
Story is she actually pulled a knife on them and refused to be dressed.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole thing.
Love her.
Put her ground on that. She says, no, I will not.
No means no.
Exactly. So she stayed at the prison for about 4 months, and that's where she was released as part of a prisoner exchange. And for the remainder of the war following her release, Walker supervised the Louisville Women's Prison Hospital, as well as an orphanage in Clarksville, Tennessee.
All right, so we know Sarah Edmonds decided to get a pension. And what was that like for her? Do we have anything on what that process was like for her, or for women who tried to get recognized after the war? Do you have anything on that?
Well, we know that Frances Clayton was able to receive a widow's pension, but not a soldier's pension. So we know that for a fact. Albert Cashier continued to live as a man, never discovered during active duty. Actually, there were a couple occasions throughout his lifetime that his sex was discovered. And the people who knew him and cared for him said, this serves nobody any purpose. And so they never revealed it. The story is that there is a story that says Albert Cashier was sent to a VA hospital after an accident and broke his leg tripping over because they forced him to dress as a woman. And we didn't find any verification for that story. Our curator tends to think that was more folklore.
Got it.
But Albert Cashier received a pension and a full military burial with full military honors. And it took about 8 years for the attorney that was settling the estate to trace Albert back to Jenny Hodgers, which was his birth name in Ireland. So that took a while. But Sarah was a little bit of a different story. So Sarah contracts malaria. She and Franklin Thompson disappears. He goes off to recover and then never returns. But this young woman, Sarah Emma Edmonds, shows up and says, I want to be a nurse. So she begins working as a nurse for the U.S. Christian Commission, and she serves out the war there. In 1865, she writes her memoir. We do have an original copy of that memoir as part of the women's exhibit. So we're really thrilled to have that on hand. She ends up getting married. She marries Linus Seeley in 1867. They have 3 children. In 1876, she attends a reunion of the 2nd Michigan. And her fellow troops, her comrades, receive her very warmly.
Wait. She attends as a woman or as a man?
As Sarah.
Oh.
Yes. Many of these men aided in having the charge of desertion removed from her military record.
Awesome.
Because technically she did come back to serve, but she served as a nurse.
Yeah.
And if you remember correctly, that's what Franklin Thompson was doing, was serving as a nurse.
Same thing.
Same thing. So they helped her. They got the desertion removed from her military record. They supported her application for a military pension. And after an 8-year battle and an act of Congress, Franklin Thompson was cleared of desertion charges, and Sarah Emma Edmonds was awarded a pension in 1884.
Oh.
So in 1897, she becomes the first woman admitted into the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR. The following year, in 1898, she passes away in LaPorte, Texas, and the next year her body is reinterred with full military honors.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, good. I'm glad she deserved it.
She did.
All right. Now, this I had a hard time wrapping my head around. I had to go back and check this several times. Dr. Mary Edwards Walker is the only woman in U.S. history to have ever received the Medal of Honor.
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy that there's only one.
Mm-hmm.
It gets even crazier. Can you walk us through the circumstances that led her to receiving the highest military honor and then the drama that unfolded around it years later?
Yeah, sure. So Dr. Walker was awarded the Medal of Honor for meritorious service via a bill signed by President Andrew Johnson, so the president right after Lincoln, on November 11, 1865. The president had cited her as having, quote, faithfully served as contract surgeon in the service of the United States and has devoted herself with much patriotic zeal to the sick and wounded soldiers, both in the field and in hospitals, to the detriment of her own health, and has also endured hardships as a prisoner of war 4 months in a southern prison while acting as a contract surgeon. Because she was a civilian and not an enlisted soldier, receiving the Medal of Honor was quite a feat.
Yeah.
Major Generals Sherman and Thomas had recommended her, and due to problems with lack of a president for awarding the medal to a woman, President Johnson opted to just give it to her directly. Unfortunately, in 1916, more than 900 names were struck from the Army Medal of Honor roll as the government was reviewing the recipients' eligibility. And that was, unfortunately, including Dr. Walker. Despite this, she would still wear the medal until her death in 1919. So for 3 years after her name was struck, she was wearing that thing everywhere. She was, proud to be the only woman having the Medal of Honor. That was such a huge honor to her, and there was no way you were going to turn that off of her clothing.
Good.
No matter if they had struck her name off of the list or what. It wasn't until more than 50 years later, in 1977, that Dr. Walker's status was reinstated during the Carter administration. So she was eventually added back onto the list. But that was more than 50 years is a pretty long time for her to have been struck in. But we're very happy, that she was given her credit back, because this is a woman who is so fully deserving of this award. Mm-hmm. It's really justice that she got her title back.
People often ask us, anytime we tell this story here at the museum, people will ask us, well, what happened to her Medal of Honor? And we would assume she was buried in it. If she wore it pretty much every day of her life,
yeah,
I would assume nothing else. So
yeah.
If they wanted to get it back,
dig it up.
There's a way to get it back, and really.
That's a little tacky to go that far.
A little bit.
All right. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share about these two incredibly brave and pioneering American women? Or do you have a final thought on their legacy for women veterans today?
Well, I think that all of the women, even the ones that we sort of just mentioned in passing and the ones that we didn't get a chance to mention, this is all the women who served as the vivandières, nurses, that were at home raising money for the U.S. Sanitary Commission,
in the factories,
working in the factories, the women who gave their lives at places like the Pittsburgh Arsenal and the Philadelphia Arsenal, who were, they were creating munitions, and there were horrible explosions. And sometimes what's left behind on that story is that these women were working with their children alongside them. So in some cases, these were whole families that were torn apart by these horrible manufacturing accidents. Then you have Frances Clayton, who in the midst of battle, her husband is mortally shot, and the story is she literally stepped over his body to continue fighting. So these were not women who cowered from fear. They were swordsmen, they were horsemen, they were marksmen. They wanted to be in the fighting, and as I said earlier, they wanted to see the elephant. They wanted the adventure of being on the battlefield. They were serious combatants when they were in war. And I think that for far too many years, women's service in the military has been minimized. When you see women who literally put their futures, Confederate women who served were often labeled as sex workers and crazy, and they were only joining up so that they could make money. The real insanity of it is that these women were driven to serve their country. We can't minimize that, because forever in history, Albert Cashier is a veteran. Franklin Thompson is a veteran.
This was a women's war just as much as it was a men's war.
Yes. And I think that legacy should inspire young women to take on challenges that they've been told that they cannot. I mean, where would we be if Sally Ride had decided she couldn't be an astronaut? To me, it is stunning that at one time women were told they couldn't because women don't. Well, women do.
Yeah.
And we can.
Yeah. And it's time to get another female Medal of Honor recipient on the books. That's just my opinion. Mary Beth Kirkus and Katie Dick, a huge thank you for joining us on the podcast today. It was a privilege to hear your perspectives on these compelling women, and we deeply appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thanks for having us.
And now for the segment I personally live for, History's Gray Area. If you've been enjoying the verifiable facts so far, get ready for a shift, because right now we're going to pull back the curtain on those fascinating, often scandalous, and sometimes utterly unbelievable stories that dance on the edge of truth. This is where history gets a little bit messy, a little bit mysterious, and a whole lot more fun. You decide what you believe, but I promise these tales are worth hearing. So now, when you hear Civil War officer's wife, you probably picture somebody daintily knitting socks by the hearth, maybe writing a letter or two. Well, today we're throwing that stereotype right out the window with Russian princess, and I'm going to get this name wrong. I know I'm going to do it wrong. Nadezhda Lovra. She wasn't just knitting socks, she was arguably running the regiment while her husband was sick. And let's just say she had opinions about his fellow officers. Forget Southern Belle, this was a Ukrainian steel magnolia on the battlefield, and quite possibly the first woman to command an American Army battalion. In 1826, the princess, I'm not going to say her name again, was born in Russia, in what is present-day Ukraine. Her father was a colonel in the Russian army, and in May of 1856, she married Ivan Vasilievich Turchaninov. I may have gotten that right. Anyway, he was an officer on her father's staff. In August of that year, the newlywed couple, without speaking a word of English, immigrated to the United States. And they tried to make a living as farmers outside of New York City at first, but that didn't work. They moved to Philadelphia and started taking classes. Ivan took engineering classes, and the princess attended classes at the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia. They learned English and changed their name to a much more manageable John Basil and Nadine Turchin. John got a job as an assistant to the future Union General George B. McClellan, who at the time was the chief engineer and vice president of the Illinois Central Railroad. John and Nadine settled in Mattoon, Illinois. The Turchins knew McClellan when he served as a military observer for the United States during the Crimean War. In 1861, John resigned from the railroad and accepted a commission as a colonel of the 19th Illinois Infantry Regiment. Now, even though there were standing orders against wives traveling with their husbands, when the 19th left for war, Nadine rode along with her husband and his men, and she carried a revolver and dagger in her belt at all times. In the spring of 1862, during a march through Tennessee, John Basil fell gravely ill, and for several days he was confined to the ambulance wagon. And in this moment, Nadine stepped in and took over some of the command duties. Now, remarkably, the men of the 19th accepted her leadership without argument or disobedience. On the battlefield, Nadine was constantly under fire, actively encouraging, nursing, and rescuing her soldiers. And through these actions, Nadine Turchin is possibly the first woman to command a U.S. military regiment. She was so respected by the soldiers that they started calling her Madam Turchin about this time. Now, just to put things in perspective, it would take 130 years before the first woman to officially command a battalion in the United States Army. Her name is General Ann Dunwoody. She was the commander of a battalion in the 82nd Airborne Division in 1992. She is also the first woman in U.S. military history to achieve the rank of 4-star general, but that's a story for another podcast. Madame Turchin is also quite famous for her diary. She started it in 1863 to practice her French language writing. Nadine's diary wasn't just filled with polite social observations, it was an unrestrained look at military life through the eyes of someone who clearly thought she knew best, and often did. She dished out strong opinions on strategy and leadership, and her entries revealed just how close she was to the action. For instance, and I personally love her for saying this, on June 27, 1863, she famously said, "Really, I think that the commanding general should take me as his chief of staff, or at least his personal advisor." Talk about confidence. And that wasn't just casual remarks. It was a bold declaration of her belief in her own military smarts and a clear sign of her frustration with what she saw as less than stellar leadership. It's not a direct admission of her taking charge, but it certainly paints a vivid picture of a woman ready to grab the reins. In 1901, after her husband's death, Nadine applied for a pension but was denied. An appeal was filed, and following the testimony from Republican Senator and former Ohio Governor Joseph B. Foraker, who served in the Turchin Brigade, a special act of Congress was passed and allowed her to receive a pension of $30 a month as a military widow instead of a nurse or a soldier. In July 1904, the first and only Russian princess to ever command a U.S. Army brigade died in Illinois. She was 77 years old. Next up, prepare yourself for a true original, the one, the only, Cynthia Charlotte Moon. And this just isn't any woman. We're talking about a thespian, a ventriloquist, a spy, and a legendary runaway bride all rolled up into one fabulous package. Born in Danville, Virginia, Lottie, as her friends called her, harbored considerable Confederate sympathies. But her personal life was even more explosive than the war itself. At one point, Lottie was betrothed to a young Army officer who would later become none other than the Union General Ambrose E. Burnside. Yes, the man famous for those glorious sideburns. However, as the fateful I do moment arrived, Lottie decided I don't. Now, legend has it, when the minister asked if she took him as her husband, she shouted, "No, sirree, Bob," before making a dramatic dash out the church. Clearly, Lottie had a rather high opinion of herself and a penchant for grand exits. And if you thought that was bold, later on Lottie was apparently engaged to 16 Confederate soldiers at once. It was her philanthropic effort to ensure they at least died happy. But it's as a spy where Lottie really makes her mark on history. In October 1862, a cunning phantom slipped into Washington, D.C., Lottie Moon. She arrived not as a spy, but as Lady Hull, a seemingly innocent English noblewoman seeking a Virginia health spa. Her deception was flawless enough to gain an audience with none other than Edwin M. Stanton, the Secretary of War. Stanton, completely taken in, even offered her a ride in President Lincoln's personal carriage as they traveled to inspect the troops on the front lines east of Richmond. Once inside, Lottie enacted her masterpiece. She feigned sleep, her head bowed, her presence benign. But beneath her slumbering facade, she was razor sharp, eavesdropping as Lincoln and Stanton, lulled by apparent privacy, discussed sensitive war plans and confidential movements. Every whispered word, every strategic detail was absorbed by Miss Moon. Armed with a note from Stanton, Lottie pressed on from the front lines, crossing into Confederate territory. The intelligence she delivered to Jefferson Davis was simply devastating. For months afterwards, Union efforts were crippled by her betrayal. Their maneuvers anticipated, their advances turned into defeats. The truth, however, eventually surfaced. Stanton and Lincoln realized their grave error. Lady Hull was none other than the notorious Lottie Moon. The cost of her deception was clear. Secretary Stanton, enraged, placed a $10,000 bounty on her head, dead or alive. Her exploit had reshaped the war, and it earned a price on her head. But every spy has their near miss, their moment of chilling recognition. And for Moon, that moment came with a cruel and ironic twist. Lottie, along with her sister and mother, were finally apprehended by none other than General Ambrose E. Burnside, the very man Lottie had so spectacularly jilted at the altar. Can you imagine it? The jilted fiancé, now a powerful Union general, staring down at the woman who had shouted, "No, sirree, Bob," and fled his wedding. He placed them under house arrest, a cold, hard justice from a man scorned. But even Burnside, it seems, couldn't resist the moon magic entirely. Eventually, perhaps with a sigh of exasperation, he released them. Cynthia Charlotte Moon was a woman who played the game of war with a theatrical flourish, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is a keen mind and an utterly captivating performance. And finally, we have the late, great Katie Stoner. Now, while digging through history, her name kept jumping out at me, but you need to understand that her contribution to the war effort aren't really found in most history books. While many women were sewing uniforms or nursing the wounded, others were navigating a very different kind of battlefield, the booming and often scandalous vice economy that sprang up around military camps. As the tenacious madam of Memphis's Aldrich House, Miss Stoner wasn't just observing the war, she was running a major operation on Beale Street. And let's just say she wasn't easily intimidated by Union generals or their detectives. Her story throws a spotlight on the hidden, often illicit, side of the Civil War home front and the women who carved out their own power within it. That said, it's a no-judgment zone here at the DAV podcast. During the Civil War, times were hard, and you did what you needed to do in order to survive. You see, when Union armies rolled into Confederate cities like Memphis and Nashville, they didn't just bring flags and freedom. Nope, they brought a sudden booming business for the oldest profession. Suddenly, these cities were absolutely swarming with what polite society called Cyprians, frail daughters of Eve, or more directly, ladies of the night. And let me tell you this, business was thriving. Now, the Union generals, bless their cotton socks, were absolutely flummoxed. Their soldiers were spending more time and money in the brothels than on drill practice. And shall we say certain unpleasantries were spreading faster than a rumor in a Union camp. We're talking widespread venereal disease, which for an army trying to win a war is less than ideal. The alarming statistics of the time reveal a grim picture. 102,893 cases of gonorrhea and 79,589 cases of syphilis alone were reported among the troops. So what was the solution these brilliant military minds came up with? What was their grand solution to this epidemic of eros? They decided to simply deport all the fallen women. Yes, their master plan was to load them onto boats and ship them down the Mississippi. The love boat gone wrong. Out of sight, out of mind, and presumably out of trouble. Now, when the military ordered Katie Stoner to close her doors, Katie, bless her entrepreneurial heart, like Lottie, basically said, "No, sirree, Bob." She simply refused. And her refusal sparked an epic scandal that left military officers red-faced, ending in a court-martial of a colonel, the dismissal of a lieutenant, and the fall of several U.S. detectives who had tried investigating Ms. Stoner by going, and I quote, "deep under the covers." So, while history books focus on grand battles, let's remember the very human, very hilarious struggle these generals had trying to put a stop to the flourishing vice economy. It wasn't just about winning a war. Sometimes it was about trying to get your soldiers to put their pants back on and stop catching, well, the clap. Who knew a podcast about the Civil War would take us from a secret stash of sweet tea in my DNA to a battlefield surgeon, cross-dressing spies, and even a madam who gave the Union generals a run for their money? What an incredible journey we had today. These women, Mary Edwards Walker, Sarah Emma Edmonds, Nadine Turchin, Lottie Moon, and Katie Stoner, they weren't just footnotes, they were forces of nature. Their stories shatter every stereotype of what a woman should be in wartime, and they remind us that courage, ingenuity, and sheer grit come in all forms, and sometimes even with a side of scandal. My immense gratitude to Mary Beth and Katie from the National Civil War Museum for sharing their incredible expertise in helping us shine a light on these unsung heroes, and yes, even anti-heroes of the Civil War. I'm Jonathan Kopinger, and on behalf of the DAV podcast Her Service, thank you for listening. Keep those ears open for our next episode, because there are always more remarkable women waiting to be discovered. Y'all come back now, you hear?